Hi, welcome to Black Girl Black Coffee, a show where we chat about black media over a nice cup of joe. I'm your host, Elise Mitchell, and today I actually didn't drink any coffee, so I feel kinda out of sorts. Today's episode is going to be about black cinema and the importance of films that are made not only by the black community, but for the black community, because there is a distinction. Like the other episodes I've done so far, I'm going to discuss 3 pieces of media, and I'm going to talk about what I like about them, and also, in this case, what I dislike about them, because I do have criticism. And then at the end, we'll talk about why it's important as a whole that the black community has media that is purposefully made for them, that's centered around them. Our first movie of the day is going to be The Help, which was a book written by Catherine Stockett, and then was made into a movie and directed by Tate Taylor. The Help is centered around a white journalist named Skeeter, who writes a book about the experiences of 2 black maids during the civil rights movement in Jackson, Mississippi during the 60s. The first important fact to note is that although the stories of the black women and their experiences during the civil rights movement is integral to the plot of the story, the main character is the white journalist named Skeeter, so we still have to view everything through the lens of whiteness and not through the struggles of the black woman. For most of the movie, we are forced to care more about Skeeter's reaction to the horrific stories that the black women are telling than the actual atrocities that happened to these poor black women. By the end of the story, the 2 black maids, Aibileen and Minnie, are liberated and no longer have to work for the oppressive and racist white families that they used to serve, but we as the audience are supposed to believe that that fact is due only to Skeeter and the publishing of her book, which pushes a false narrative that without a white savior there will be no black liberation. The film also perpetuates the idea that one must actively choose to be openly and oppressively racist in order to contribute to oppressive systems. For example, because the white woman that Aibileen is a maid for is openly racist and bigoted and full of hatred towards Aibileen, we are supposed to hate her. On the contrary, the white woman that Minnie works for is supposed to be kind and understanding and compassionate, so we're supposed to like her, completely ignoring the fact that both of them own maids, which is still an oppressive system even if you are nice to the maid. The film did such a poor job of accurately portraying the trials and tribulations that these black maids went through that one of the real-life maids that this story was based upon called her portrayal in the novel embarrassing and emotionally upsetting, and she even filed a lawsuit against the author. And the story's perpetuating of racial stereotypes and centering of white issues instead of black issues in a film about the black struggle is explained perfectly by the fact that both the author and the director are white. This movie fails to be black cinema because it is not cinema by the black community, and it is definitely not cinema for the black community. The next movie we're going to talk about is a little bit more recent. It came out in 2020. It's Two Distant Strangers, which was directed by Trayvon Free and Martin Desmond Rowe. Two Distant Strangers came out in late 2020 and was very obviously inspired by the police brutality incidents and the riots that we saw occur in the summer of 2020. The story follows a main character, Carter, who is a black man who is living what could be like a twisted version of Groundhog's Day, but instead of reliving the same day over and over again until you figure out why you're reliving it, Carter is stuck in an endless loop of police brutality. Each day, he leaves his girlfriend's house to go check on his dog, and he is met with a police officer who, after some form of misunderstanding, ends up shooting and killing him. This fact is where this movie succeeds at being black cinema created by the black community, but it fails to be black cinema created for the black community. Carter is forced to face several incredibly stressful situations that involve police, and he is forced to die in several incredibly gruesome and tragic manners, all of which seems to leave the police officer that he's been interacting with completely unbothered. At the end of the film, Carter attempts to reconcile with the police officer and try to make a personal connection with him in order to keep the police officer from killing him in this one last-ditch effort. However, this last-ditch effort fails when the police officer simply kills Carter for the sake of it. After realizing that the police officer is going to kill Carter whether there is reasonable suspicion or not, the movie ends and it is revealed to us that Carter has been reliving this day over 100 times, meaning he has been killed by police 100 times. We are then shown a sprawling list of black people who have been killed at the hands of police officers. The intended effect by the director was to teach audiences about the inescapability of certain police brutality acts simply because they are rooted in racism and not in rationale. But that point is lost in the triggering nature of this movie as a whole. The purpose of opening up conversations about racism and policing is null and void when the method you use to start these conversations is to subject the audience to traumatizing scenes of black pain and black death over and over and over again, and insinuated black death over 100 times. This movie fails at being a piece of black cinema for the black community because feasibly, there's only one group of people that can watch this movie without feeling utter dread about the inescapability of racism, and that's white people. And why make a movie about black struggle for white people? The last movie I want to talk about is a complete change of pace, as it does not fall into the genre of realistic fiction. It is a horror movie. It is Get Out, directed by Jordan Peele. Now you may be wondering why I chose a horror movie when I'm trying to exemplify how you can talk about the black community and make content for the black community without it being centered around black pain when most horror movies are full of pain. When that's part of the reason I chose the horror movie. Get Out does the job of exemplifying individual and also widely understood black struggles better than either of the two movies I talked about earlier, despite the subject matter. Jordan Peele performed an impressive feat by taking a genre that is steeped in white stories and all-white casts and being able to make a story that is not only relatable to lots of black Americans, but also breaks down different forms of racism for the white audience as well, making his movie both an enjoyable experience for the black community and an educational one for the white audience. Jordan Peele is able to make this movie such a relatable experience to the black audience watching because as a black man, he understands the more mundane horrors that black people face on a regular basis. For example, one of the main aspects of what we might consider quote-unquote black horror in this movie comes before we even understand who the antagonist is. Jordan Peele includes subtleties in the movie Get Out that are almost undetectable to the white audience because they hold no real meaning to them, but to non-white and specifically black audience members, these moments are horrifying. For example, when we learn the rising action of the film is Chris, the main character, a black man, going to visit his white girlfriend's parents. Immediately, the black audience understands the inherent danger that comes with meeting your white significant other's parents, but this seems like a non-issue to the white audience. As Chris is met with multiple offensive microaggressions at the hands of his girlfriend's parents, only to be given false or flimsy reassurance that's supposed to satirize the girlfriend's white feminism, the white audience is merely left uncomfortable or in an awkward situation, whereas the black audience is already steeped in the horror of this movie. While the movie gives reassurance to the black audience that their experiences with this type of more subtle and less obvious racism are valid, it also creates conversations to be had about why moments of subtle or more covert racism are so horrifying to the black audience, because it usually denotes further bigotry behind the scenes, which can often lead to trusting people who may put you in harmful situations. By being a member of the black community and by making his target audience the black community, Jordan Peele is able to create a movie that is authentically and intrinsically black horror in nature without losing any of its market value as a blockbuster. He has created incredibly well-received black cinema for and by the black community. When trying to understand why black cinema is so important to exist, it's important to understand that the black community has to fight to hold space in Hollywood every single day. Although the 90s was a great time for black cinema, including movies like Devil in a Blue Dress and Deep Cover, Daughters of the Dust, and even shows like The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, writers and directors were still being careful about what they produced because they knew that if one Black creative faced criticism for something that they wrote, then all Black creatives would be punished for it. And when Hollywood decides that they are bored of the stories and the narratives that the Black community is trying to produce, they simply stop hiring them. Even in modern day, in 2015 and 2016, we saw Oscars where there were no Black nominees. In fact, the Oscars went out of their way to include Black stories, but only nominate the white participants in the film. Without Black creatives to make stories that are catered towards the Black community, Black presence in media ceases to exist. Messages of the Black struggle that are not tainted by the white lens, and the appropriate representation that comes along with those stories, is lost when the stories stop being made by Black creatives and for a Black audience.